I don't think there's ever been a game I've had this many mixed feelings on, and I think it's because I don't find much enjoyment out of playing the game, while simultaneously recognizing that PUBG isn't a bad game. I found enjoyment from the game when I've played with friends, but when I log in to play the exact same game alone, I find myself questioning why I'm playing it. This might be because I don't like shooter games, this might be because I'm piss poor at playing the game, or this might be because the game has a few problems with it. PUBG requires no introduction, it's a complete mammoth in the gaming scene, and I'm sure everyone watching this knows about, or has at least heard of, the 100 player fight to the death game from somewhere. Seriously, this game was everywhere over the course of 2017, and I'm struggling to figure out if the hype did the game any good. I mean, it sold a fuck ton of copies, so yes, the hype did wonders for the game, but this is more to do with the fact that PUBG essentially had a monopoly on the Battle Royale concept for far longer than it should have. Battle Royale isn't a unique concept, but it was one that hadn't seen life in video games outside of Minecraft, and I'm surprised that it took this long for the concept to finally become popularized. Whether or not the game did an excellent job of doing Battle Royale is another debate entirely, and it's one that I'm about to throw my 2 cents on. As I mentioned earlier, I'm piss poor at the game, and some people might be questioning my ability to even be talking about it. If you're this bad at the game, why do you feel as if you're able to give it a bad name, which I would respond to as, my skill at a game shouldn't impact my ability to have a justified opinion on it, as long as I understand the basic concept behind the game's purpose, and how it goes about doing so. And yes, I am defending mainstream critics when I say this, even their paid off opinions mean something for someone. Even if I did spend the hundreds of hours of required play to get good at the game, I don't think my opinions on its quality would be all that different. The major bit of criticism the game has received over its quality has largely been focused on it being a technical mess and filled with hackers, and while yes, these are problems, it's not going to do anyone any good if I sit here for a few minutes and complain about them. Not just because everyone beat me to it, but because these problems will hopefully be phased out as its development continues. That phrase there, as its development continues, might sound weird considering the game was released a few months ago, but calling PUBG a finished game is a grave insult to games in beta. The 1.0 release of this game wasn't so much a celebration of the game's completion, but more of a marketing technique to revive the dying hype train. Articles upon tweets, upon front of Steam store page ads, and then the flood of the 1.0 release streams kept people talking about the game, at least for a little while longer. Its abrupt transition from a broken early access game to a broken released game almost seemed out of Bluehole's fear of having the game forever stuck in early access. But now that it's in 1.0, the in early access excuse that seemingly defends it from all criticism vanished, so allow me to criticize it. This isn't going to go well with a lot of people, so to save at least some of my ass, allow me to explain the things that I did like about the game. One of these things is the vaulting mechanic, and its inclusion is incredibly important, as the people designing the map no longer have to consider the incredibly limited movement of its players. These constraints are present in the original map's design, and I think Sunken City was about as creative as the game could get, while ensuring everywhere was accessible by walking. Now with vaulting implemented, I can't wait to see this area remastered, after seeing some of the more interesting areas of the new desert map. Vaulting increases the skill cap of the game, because knowing where you can and can't vault, and subsequently how you can creatively traverse the map to flank your enemies, adds another layer of strategy and skill to the game. It's a shame that the many areas of the map are just faster to traverse by jumping and walking, because for some reason the vault animation is really fucking slow, but this is just a nitpick of a feature I honestly believe is necessary for the style of game PUBG is. The other one of these things is the gunplay, even if I fucking suck at it. The part of the game where you shoot the guys in the face is, well, it's fun, and it needs to be, because the whole game is built around it, so double thumbs up there. As a complete newbie in the shooting department, I can't really talk in depth about it. All I can say is that shooting is accurate and feels responsive. I have a few nitpicks about it. I dislike the inability to toggle your zeroing on anything but the 8 times and maybe the 15 times, I never got that one. You used to be able to do so on the 4 times and even on some sites a few months ago, but no more for some reason. If the reason to remove it was to raise the skill cap, it definitely did that, but it replaced the knowledge-based skill with mechanical skill. Now you have to lead your shots instead of finding out the right zeroing to use, and for accessibility purposes, bringing back toggleable zeroing would be nice. This might just be a problem of me being bad at the game. Maybe I should just get good, but maybe the game should allow me to get good by playing it. I like games with high skill caps, don't get me wrong, but these games also need to have a proper learning curve so that people who want to get good at the game can do so. From an accessibility standpoint, this is PUBG's fatal error. There's two ways to get good at the game. One is through knowledge of the map, where the good loot is, where the hotspots are, etc., which you can obtain by playing the game and from guides online, so double thumbs up there. Getting good at the gunplay, however, can only be done by playing the game. Sure, guides can help you understand where you're going wrong, but practice is the only real way to do so. It's next to impossible for a player new to shooters to get good at shooters in a reasonable time by playing PUBG. The most efficient way to get good is to play another game entirely. There are no tutorials, no extra fun game modes, no shooting ranges. Oh wait, the game throws you into its cruel world and says, hope you have a good time, and it's not for the better either, since there's no way for a newbie to get good at firefights without first being in a firefight. Since the game is all about killing players with no remorse, other players will have no problem preying on the weak. This means whenever a newbie meets another player, they will likely die before they have a chance to shoot their gun, so it could take hours for players to learn how to defend themselves, the bare minimum. Then they have to learn how each of the individual guns work, how to manage recoil, how to lead their shots, so on and so forth, and with no past shooter experience, this learning curve of PUBG is almost impossible to climb. PUBG should not be your first shooting experience, coming from someone who did play this game for hours and hours to get somewhat competent, in the vain attempt to stop being a burden to my squad. I still am a burden to my squad, mind you, but at least now I have the slightest ability to fight back. But aside from that hiccup, I generally think the game is overall pretty good. I can't recommend it for the solo experience for reasons I'll get into, but it is very good as a casual game with friends, acting as a backdrop for conversations about random shit to happen. This is probably why it became so popular in the streaming community, as it gives a medium for the entertainers to entertain, as well as providing some interesting moments to watch every now and then. And as such, this ends the review portion of this video, and the rest of my critique will be looking at the game from a more competitive viewpoint, rather than as a casual game you can play with friends, where majority of these criticisms can be overlooked. However, if playing the game hyper-competitively, the game is fundamentally flawed and will require some extensive revisions if competitive PUBG is something that wants to happen. I don't really know how to make this section flow properly, so I'm going to list the things that I think prevent the game from being viable as an esport and go from there. And these are as follows: random loot, the map design, the play zone, and the metagame, or the optimal way to play the game. When I was first writing this script, I was convinced it was the metagame that was the core problem, but after doing research, replaying the game for several hours, and watching the past competitive PUBG competitions, I've realized that all four of these contribute to the problem. I'll tackle these in order, so I'll start with the random loot element, which is a tough spot to criticize considering that this is the whole point of PUBG, finding out what you can and then making the most of what you've got. This is fine, I guess, for a casual game, but for a competitive scene, I would think otherwise. I don't think there's anything fun about playing or watching someone find a gun and gun down someone who hasn't. I didn't feel any sense of accomplishment doing this. He probably didn't have any fun by having no way to fight back, and you probably didn't have any fun watching it. The only reason to keep watching is to see how many shots I miss. It's because of the random loot that makes dropping a popular hotspot so risky, not just because of the high player density. If you're unlucky enough to not find a gun, you're dead to someone who did. So then, instead of dropping at popular spots and rolling the die, instead just drop at quieter areas and loot up peacefully, and you're forced to do this if you don't feel like tempting fate. Everyone in the IEM Invitational did this, so you should too if you want to win. Some people might be wondering, so what's the problem? The problem is a stale viewing experience, which is why in casual PUBG this isn't a big deal. Watching players loot for 15 minutes isn't exactly fun, and incentivizing dropping at loot hotspots would mean more early game action, which is currently far too risky for the reasons I just explained. Finding other random loot, such as randomly finding a level 3 helmet, or finding an SMG instead of an assault rifle, or not finding any painkillers, I generally think is okay. It ties in with the core gameplay concept of making the best of what you've got, and it's an element of randomness that I think should probably be controlled for balance reasons, but I don't think it should be removed. Using what you have available to you is what Battle Royale should be all about, and I also think it should be fair. I'll come back to this later. The map design is next on my list, and it's not a problem with the design of the individual towns and buildings. They're not very interesting, and many of them are cut and paste assets from town to town, making each town blend together, but it's honestly not a big enough issue to complain about. The simplicity and familiarity between the towns reduces the learning curve of learning the map, the most boring part of what little a learning curve PUBG has, so it's a necessary evil. The biggest issue with the map is its size. It's needlessly large simply because it can be. There's so much empty open space between each of the buildings that traversing the map can take several minutes of time, creating boring gameplay where nothing is happening except this, and this, and this. This is the sole reason why I can't recommend PUBG for its solo experience, because of how much time is wasted by moving around. You might call this point nitpicking, and if you've only played PUBG, then you might not see the problem here. It wasn't even something that I realized until I played another game entirely. Now, this is the only comparison between PUBG and Fortnite that I'm going to be making, because while both games have the same core gameplay design, they handle it in such drastically different ways that further comparing the two would be like comparing Forza and Mario Kart because they're both racing games. The debate on which game is better is more based on personal preference than any objective fact. Fortnite's map is far smaller, which means less of this and more of this, making games faster and more action-packed. There are a few other reasons as to why Fortnite is faster paced, but this video is about PUBG, and I don't want to make this video any longer than it has to be. Smaller maps means more confrontations, which means more shooting, which means shorter but more fun games. The sheer size of PUBG's map dilutes this experience, so after 10 to 15 minutes of this, you finally get to some action, and if you get killed, you queue it up and do it all again. If the map design was to make encounters sparse, to increase the tension as you travel from minute to minute seeing no one, then they definitely accomplished that. But being killed by someone you didn't see after running for 20 minutes isn't exactly the definition of fun once you realize that you're never going to get those 20 minutes back. And if you're wondering where I'm running to the play zone, or away from the blue circle as it's been nicknamed for reasons I hope I don't have to explain. This is the game's way of bringing players together to force confrontations and prevent hour-long standoffs. At fixed intervals throughout the match, the game randomly places a circle of a specific size on the map, getting gradually smaller each time, and when the timer runs out, a force field that drains health closes in. Early on the damage is meaningless, but as the game goes on, the damage dramatically increases. So playing outside the play zone is very bad unless you're stocked on meds or feeling suicidal. And you might be thinking to yourself, hey Joey, that's actually not a bad way of doing it if you're wrong and a moron. The consequence of being outside the play zone, the draining of health, is actually pretty good. I wouldn't change that at all. But I would change the part where it randomly decides where the next safe zone is going to be. This isn't a big problem in the first few circles, but as you approach the final stages of the game, the placement of where the safe zone is going to be can decide who wins, based on nothing but chance.
Absolutely. They're going to get into a little bit of a standoff here until we know where the last circle is, but all these teams are going to have to go low and slow. Liquid comes out with the best circle, being blessed by PlayerUnknown. Given that spot, everyone else now has to come to them.
The random placement of the play zone becomes even worse when the optimal way to play the game is to be defensive. Take a building, build a fort of cars, or even use a ridge with the blue circle behind you, and then shoot the people who are in the open, and they'll have no real way to fight back because they're sitting ducks. The problem I have with this metagame is because PUBG is a game all about killing other people with no remorse to be the final victor, yet there is no incentive to fight anyone. It's something that the PUBG competitive scene realized after their first competition, and even pro players have commented on this. The scoring system that was used in the IEM Invitational does incentivize people to kill other people, I guess, but the way that it happens is still all about taking and holding cover. Everyone in the competition is just sitting in buildings, looking out and taking long-range firefights. It's not exactly anything that the trailers for the game visualized, and if this was the intended vision for the game, then there's a lot that needs to be worked out. I'm going to provide some examples as to why I think this metagame is absolutely trash for a competitive scene, and I'm going to use some footage of this solo game that I played, where it's me versus other guy. I'm in the gym part of school and he's in the school part of school. We see each other and immediately we dart from each other's vision to avoid any confrontation because why the hell would we fight? If he's over there, he's no threat to me, and over here, I'm no threat to him. There's too much cover to work with for a medium range firefight, and too much open space between the buildings to consider an assault. We should both loot up and go our separate ways, but instead, I decide that removing him from the game and taking his loot is the best way to go. You should agree, because by killing him I'd get all of his loot, the only current incentive to killing someone, and more loot means a higher chance of survival. But as it turns out, not fighting in the first place gives me an even greater chance of survival. The risk of my death for being aggressive is simply too high. I could get caught in the open, and even if I do breach his building, he still has the advantage by being able to camp a corridor and wait for me to walk down it. The extra loot isn't worth the risk. I should just leave for the play zone, but instead, I circle the fence of the school like a shark. Turns out, this guy has big balls and decides to charge into my building, and he won't find me because I'm here. I've taken cover. I'm playing defensively. I'm staying out of sight and waiting for my moment to strike. When he doesn't find me, he runs directly towards me and meets his unfortunate demise. Was this fun to watch? Because it sure as hell wasn't fun or satisfying to play, and it certainly wasn't interesting to explain. Now imagine everyone doing this at a competition. How much of a snooze fest would that be? This highlights the fundamental issue with PUBG. You are rewarded for camping and controlling an area and are punished if you try to contest it. This isn't actually all that bad. Many games have an uninteresting but optimal way to play the game that just becomes the accepted norm. But when the play zone randomly changes, and randomly decides that the safe area you've spent your time and energy fighting for is no longer part of the playing field, that's fucking bullshit. This forces you to contest someone else's area of control, and you are at a clear disadvantage doing that. The second game of the IEM Invitational showcases exactly this. There's 10 alive, 2 squads of 4, and 2 stragglers, and they've each fought for some safe zone to camp out in. The next play zone has been randomly placed on where C9 is, which means when the blue does come in, these 6 players are forced to move and contest C9's position, and all C9 has to do is hold their position and kill everyone who moves, which is literally everyone else. This is a complete bloodbath, and even the shoutcasters agree.
So as all these teams prepare to move into the circle, C9 in a good hold position.
Yeah, TSM have found a little bit to work with, but they still need to move in. You can see everyone's trying to bait out everyone else. You move first. I don't want to go. Because as soon as that one team goes, it all falls apart. It sparks. Absolutely. And it just spirals now. You can no, it's not even the circle doing this. It's everyone else. Cloud9 still in their fortress, holding this one down. They know that TSM are screwed.
All the time spent looting, taking ground, and defending that ground all meant nothing because the circle decided that C9 deserved to win. Had the circle been on TSM's side, C9 would have been the ones being massacred, so the winner of this match wasn't decided by any skill, it was decided purely by chance. This is also shown off in Game 6 of the same competition, and yes, I'm providing another example to prove a point. FaZe had spent most of their time rushing to this barn.
Ultrafine, the GG guys in this phase to move. They're going to try and make their way towards the long barn here, get themselves in. No one's actually in there just yet. GG clears up towards Penta. They've locked this one down, and that's brilliant. They're taking a little bit of blue damage to get into the good position, and now they wait.
A very strong defensive position with lots of cover to work with, while AAA is stuck outside, having won a firefight with the other survivors.
AA are taking great fights here, though. FaZe are being hammered at this point. You got players...
This position is a complete standoff. AAA can't push FaZe's position and vice versa because of this clear open space between the two teams. There's just not enough cover to work with. So instead of having a stalemate where both teams set up camp and live the rest of their existence in their respective safe zones, which is boring to watch, the play zone instead decides that the next play zone is going to be exactly where AAA is, essentially telling FaZe to go fuck themselves. And because of the stupid scoring system that this competition used, where kills as well as winning are rewarded with points, which incentivizes killing people sort of, it also incentivizes denying kills. So FaZe just stays put and suicides to the blue zone, which means you don't even get to see AAA brutally execute anyone. This is a problem in casual PUBG as well, although not as major, because casual public matches are far more chaotic than what you're ever going to see in competitive PUBG, where people aren't just running around trying to find the fun in the game, they're playing to win, and each of these 4 problems on this list contributes to a stale watching experience, one of the most important things in an esport. The camera work and the spectator feature will also have to be changed, but that's a technical issue that will hopefully be changed in PUBG's future. But PUBG? Stale watching experience? Isn't it one of the most popular games to be streamed? Streamers playing PUBG and competitive PUBG are 2 completely different beasts, despite them playing the exact same game. You are more likely watching PUBG streams less because they're playing PUBG, and more because the streamer themselves is entertaining, and the game is merely a backdrop for their entertainment. The streamers are also really fucking good at the game, I'd hope they are after playing it after so many hours, so you might also be watching them because you want to learn how to improve through observation. However, the streamers are not playing in a hyper-competitive environment, even if they themselves are playing the game competitively. They're playing in the same casual, chaotic games you and I play in, which, as I said earlier, is quite fun with friends but frustrating solo because of the downtime, which is utilised by streamers to be interactive with their audience or to be entertaining. Streamers also often go out of their way to find fights, trying to provide some entertaining content for others to feast their eyes on.
No!
Players playing in a competition for money are not doing so for entertainment purposes. They're not going to be running around looking for fights and showing off the good gunplay the game has. They're playing to win, and the best strategies at winning aren't fun to play and they aren't fun to watch. And these 4 issues must be addressed if PUBG is ever going to be taken seriously as an esport. And PUBG does want to be taken seriously as an esport. It's one of the visions that Brendan PlayerUnknown Green had when designing the game, but in its current state, PUBG is far from esports ready. But instead of just complaining about it, how can we fix these issues? I think giving some suggestions for Bluehole to take on board and maybe even consider implementing is far more useful than me calling the game shit and then feeling smug for the rest of the day. The flaws I just described are obvious to me, someone very inexperienced with not only PUBG but shooters in general, so they're likely glaringly obvious to Bluehole as well. I hope. So leaving it at that isn't going to be helping anybody, even if what I'm about to suggest is just as useful. I'll address the least problematic on the list first, the random loot and early game massacres. There's a few simple solutions to fix this. One of them is having fixed gun spawn locations, so a gun will always spawn in the same spot every game. The gun doesn't have to be the same every time to keep the make the most of what you have gameplay elements intact, but at least you can learn a general loot route that will always give you a gun, instead of checking as many loot spawns as possible and hoping a gun spawned in one of them. It adds another layer of knowledge to learning the map, and some strategies to quickly finding a weapon in hotspots can be formed, so the ensuing brawl for these areas are less about chance and more about skill. The other solution is to have players drop down with a weapon in tow. This starting weapon would have to be worse than all the guns and pistols you can already find on the map, but by giving everyone a firearm from the second they drop down, players can fight back if they're unfortunate enough to not find a better weapon. Sure, they'll still be at a disadvantage, but giving players a fighting chance to skillfully kill their assailant instead of bending over and looping up is, in my opinion, much more fun to play and much more interesting to watch. These 2 suggestions don't actually need to be changed, they end up creating more problems than they attempt to solve. This is honestly the least offensive problem on the list, but the other items absolutely need to be addressed. I think the map should be smaller, maybe 6x6 instead of 8x8 if they still want their maps to be large but not gigantic. This would remove a large amount of empty space that they currently have, which removes a lot of the needless travelling, which means a lot of players will find each other sooner. This means more firefights, which means more action throughout the game instead of a snooze fest until the final stage of the game, overall creating a more entertaining viewing and playing experience. But changing the entire map is a lengthy process, and I would fully understand if Bluehole would rather leave their map the way it is. I am, after all, only one man with an opinion, but it would certainly help with the pacing issue the game currently has. One thing we can't change on this list is the optimal defensive playstyle the game has, because regardless of what we try to change, when pitting a human against a human, a defensive playstyle that capitalizes on mistakes will always be the superior strategy. Since Battle Royale has more of a focus on survival rather than killing as many people as possible, only fighting when you absolutely have to will always be ideal. There is no way to fairly punish this playstyle without fundamentally changing the game, which is a terrible idea. So then, the only thing that absolutely has to be changed is the play zone mechanic, and even player very known agrees with me.
So gameplay-wise, what do you see are the challenges to becoming a competitive game?
We just need to balance stuff like the blue zone. You know, we really do need to do some passes on the blue zone to make it more competitive and fairer for players.
And so what about that is unbalanced in your opinion?
We just have to look at, like, you know, sometimes it may jump too much, or the distance may be too long, or it might be moving too fast. So
the random jumps that can decide games isn't competitive. Sure, it might force fights for some entertaining moments, but it isn't fair to the players trying their best to maximize their chances at winning to be called a complete chance. I watched a lot of the competitive PUBG games, and one thing that I noticed is that the teams are always getting to the first 2 play zones safely, and if they're staying outside, they're doing it by choice to continue looting. I think that the punishment for being outside the play zone is completely balanced. Perhaps it needs to be more punishing in the early stages if you really want to force players to come together earlier, but I personally don't believe this is a problem, as constantly taking damage costs medical supplies, which could be vital in the later stages of the game. So, if high-level players are reliably reaching the first and second circles, which means my inability to do so is more my mistake than the game's, I think the first circle being randomly decided is completely fair, and then every circle after that should shrink around the central point. Having the first circle randomly decided creates more variety with a currently gigantic map, and having a predictable play pattern for the play zone allows teams to form strategies about where they want to travel, taking into consideration both short-term needs and long-term needs, both knowledge-based skills that are currently missing from the game, because even if you strategically plan to camp out in a house or form a fort of cars, there's no guarantee that it will remain in the play zone on the next jump.
Is a team like Method can choose to set up camp there, and if they do win the circle, they potentially win the game because they get to have ruins, high castle, places that are entirely defendable. If the next circle doesn't favor them though, I don't see them going too deep into this round.
If you want to create even more incentive for early game fights to occur, you can even reveal the location of the first circle before you jump from the plane. This then creates a strategy of where do you want to land. Do you land at the center of the circle early and fight for control of a strategic defensive position, holding it for as long as possible and protecting it from every angle?
Unless you end up with like one of the god complexes, you can kind of find yourself being aggressed on by too many different angles. Because that's the big thing. Sure, it's nice to have like whenever the circle favors you, but you have to make sure you're holding all of the angles as it comes in. Nobody can come in. You have to hold down this real estate and make sure nobody comes around you and hopefully secure those kills, get the loot off of it.
Or do you land away from the circle and inch towards the center while also preparing for the risk of having to contest a team in a very strong defensive position? These are layers of strategy that the game currently lacks, and this change would also incentivize people to want to fight earlier, kill players and capture their defensive position, because players will know right from the start where the good camping spots are. This works around the current optimal playstyle that the game has, and adding more layers of skill to these elements is absolutely what a competitive game requires.
Wipes out a team, very clean play by Simsy, and he's going to be sort of the saving grace for Penta in this match as he opens up a spot for them in the circle.
The changes I just suggested might be garbage, and they probably are, but I know for a fact that how the mechanics are in their current states are just not ready for the competitive scene. This isn't just because of the bugs and the technical faults of the game either, and shit-talking Bluehole because their game is buggy isn't helping anyone.
When I hear people like ragging on the dev team, it really like, I get mad because it's like, you don't understand how hard they work. They really, and some people are like, oh, but we pay, this, we expect them to work 24 hours a day. It's like, what the fuck?
Watching Brendan talk about PUBG and seeing how passionate he is about his game convinces me that the game's development isn't going to stop until it's perfect. The Battle Royale concept is fantastic, and I do strongly believe that there is a place for PUBG competitively, especially with the amount of strategy and skill that the game could potentially demand. Lessening the impact of the random elements, as well as creating more layers of strategy without drastically changing what the game already has, might not be the only steps the game has to take to reach greatness, but there's certainly steps in the right direction. If you've played a lot of PUBG, you will know that there's two elements of the game that I didn't even mention, the red zone and the crates. I couldn't really fit them organically into the script, so instead I'm going to shoehorn them in at the end. The red zone's presentation post 1.0 is fucking awesome. I love the sound of the mortars and the bombs crashing down around you, which is something that you can hear from a distance, which is also due to the imperfect but still great sound design the game has, which is also something I failed to mention. You can accurately hear footsteps and even other people landing around you, so double thumbs up there. But from a gameplay perspective, I think the red zone should be removed, just flat out. Especially if Bluehole is going to embrace the defensive playstyle that the competitive scene has shown us the game already has, and especially if they're going to keep the map the same size. A lot of the map is outdoors, so taking a defensive position on a hill, or on a ridge, or building a fort of cars is just going to be part of the game, and that's completely fine. The red zone punishes staying outdoors, however, and the only reliable way to prevent dying to them is to stay indoors or to vacate the area entirely, and I don't think it's fair to have a squad of players that are the king of the hill to be forced to surrender their position because of a random red zone, and this can be even more punishing if the bomb hits a fort of cars and blows them all up. This isn't fair, it isn't strategic, and it isn't competitive, and its removal from competitive PUBG should be translated to the live servers as well. The crates, on the other hand, are fantastic, and I would argue that they should have even more powerful stuff in them than there already is, although balancing what the crates should and shouldn't have in them is outside my knowledge. Mechanically, they're fantastic. They're well telegraphed with the plane and its slow descent, and it incentivizes players to be aggressive instead of punishing defensive players. Incentivizing aggressive play also creates more engagements, which means more entertainment for the audience. Being random, sometimes it can land next to players to get the loot uncontested, which might be imbalanced, but other people won't know if a crate is taken or not until they get there, so a firefight over an empty crate could still occur. After watching many competitive PUBG matches, I don't think the teams are prioritizing these.
It's not often you see the pro teams fighting for the crates. I mean,
which is why making the rewards more powerful is something I would consider. But it's a finite balance issue that I'll leave for people far more skilled and cunning than me to discuss. A huge thank you if you made it all the way to the end of the video. It really means a lot to me, especially considering the length. I thought this was going to be a quick 10-minute video when I started. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. I plan on making more videos looking at games critically and what we can learn from them. Once again, thanks so much for watching, and I'll hopefully see you next time. Never change.